So I've done my best to condense your wealth of knowledge into like 3 sentences, which is probably ripping you all off significantly. So I'm going to allow you to correct my errors and give the audience a really good overview of who you are and what you do. Andrew, do you mind starting?
Yeah, no, so far so good. Andrew Morlet, Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We were set up in 2010 by Dame Ellen MacArthur to really develop and promote the idea of a circular economy. And as you said, we particularly focus on insights and analysis to really quantify the economic rationale of the idea. We work with business, governments and cities. We work in education, in communications. And we've done a number of major initiatives around particular topics, and one of the ones we've been talking about today is plastics, of course. We did a report we got into the topic about 2013, and we did a major report in 2016, which was called The New Plastics Economy, and in that report we showed that by 2050 we're likely to have more plastics in the ocean than fish. And that was fairly significant because it stimulated a lot of interest in the topic. And then since then we've been working very actively with industry to really look at a plastic system that can work, one where we actually design out waste and pollution, we keep the plastic materials in the system and use it more, so the reuse models, examples like Loop. And also we aim to regenerate natural systems, so ultimately through the work that the Foundation does with these organisations is aiming to design systems that build natural capital rather than deplete it. So ultimately the more industrial activity we do, the better the world becomes and the better the natural systems become. So that's the basic idea.
Oh, fantastic. Igor, can you tell us a little bit more? You've got an incredible project.
Well, yes, of course, but I brought a little video. Maybe they can...
Oh, yes, I do like video. Should we put it on?
If the...
Can we roll the video, please?
Because it synthesizes what I can say in a...
World population has increased tremendously from 1960 until today and will rise in the coming years. Access to proper housing and water is vital and becomes more and more challenging. Building with traditional materials like concrete or steel generates lots of CO2. The construction process itself is slow, and the resources needed, such as sand and wood, become scarcer. On the other hand, building water supply networks to cover large pieces of land and provide everyone with water is very complicated and costly. How could we tackle all these problems at the same time? How can we keep offering proper housing to everyone and access to water without having a negative impact on the environment? We have a solution. We developed a way to upcycle used plastic bottles and transform them into modular construction structures, and this process can be done locally and profit local economies. How does it work? Empty plastic bottles are collected and recycled, and thanks to our industrial production protocol, we transform them into modular construction structures up to the highest construction norms. These structures can be produced rapidly and easily assembled, making them a scalable and effective solution to build many homes. The modular house is designed to easily host solar panels, and above all, the structures were conceived to be fully recyclable, ensuring a circular economy. Building entire green neighborhoods is now feasible. UHCS not only improves access to affordable, prime-quality housing, it also fosters clean energy use, local waste collection, and valorization, providing for all an inclusive and sustainable access to housing and energy.
Okay, so I think that kind of tells us everything.
Yes, now I would like to turn this new economy of about $100 billion, which is the economy we see coming through thanks to this wastes, all these wastes, towards development. Because there's about 5 billion people who are not really in the economy. They don't have a good life. I think that this is a very good opportunity to oversee how to use this opportunity to develop.
I mean, it's an incredible idea to think we'll take plastic bottles that are otherwise going to go to the dump or not be fully recycled, and we'll turn that into housing in developing countries where it's desperately required by creating the modular structures that you can use to...
Well, it's a very simple, took a long time to fine tune. It's about 4 profiles that can be extruded day and night, and you can produce, and by assembling these profiles, you can build up to 2 floors with the Swiss construction norms or European construction norms, so very high quality.
High quality houses essentially made from plastic.
Exactly.
Incredible. Atalay, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do as well?
Sure. I'm a faculty, a professor at INSEAD, a business school that spends quite a bit of time and energy on looking at the interface of the business and the society. I recently joined INSEAD, actually. Most of my work is academic, trying to establish the connection between initiatives such as the circular economy and the economics of these kind of initiatives on the ground. So what I try to do is to explore how ideas for circularity can be implemented in for-profit or regulated context, specifically trying to understand how regulations can help overcome certain barriers or create other barriers that are not intended, essentially, in a nutshell.
Well, I'm up for this discussion now because I've got all the smartest people in the room. I'm now feeling like the dumbest person on the stage, but I'm going to see if I can hold my own here. So I'm going to start with a really basic question. Why do we need new materials? Like, why can't we just reuse what we've got already? Why do we need to get creative with new materials in a circular economy?
One of the big things, big issues with the circular economy is that we need, first of all, to be circulating healthy materials. So we need to be innovating to take out of the system the materials that have got questionable health impacts or that have properties that will cause them to decay if they escape into nature into microplastics, or so there's many of those types of ideas. But we also need to shift away from finite materials into renewable materials. So we need to do a lot more innovation in biosourced, biobenign materials, bringing together fourth industrial technologies with renewable materials to give them technical properties that technical materials give you, but they're renewable and they're low carbon and they're potentially biodegradable in nature if they escape. So that would be one example. Microfibers is a very, very good example in the fashion space. You know, microplastics that wash out of your clothing in the washing machine. You know, if you think of the lint that you take off your dryer, there's sort of the same amount of that stuff as washing into the ocean every day out of your washing machine. And that's mostly plastic and it's small format. So materials innovation that prevents that happening is going to become super important, I think, over the next few years.
And Igor, how do you see it? Because you've taken an existing material and rethought of it. Why did you pick plastic rather than just creating a new material from scratch?
Well, as I was saying, motivation was how can we give a home to all these people? And it seemed without impacting nature. So it seemed to me obvious that non-biodegradable materials that we point out to be horrible today because a little amount, which is already much too much, ends up in the sea. I think this is an opportunity because of the number of human beings on the planet. It's an opportunity to fulfill our needs, like housing or other needs, without impacting nature. I always have the idea of somebody sitting in my UHCHCS house in the living room. He's looking out the window and he sees the forest hasn't been cut because none of the trees were used for building this house. And he looks at the river and he sees the water's still there, the fish are still there, because we didn't need to open up the river to take the sand or use large quantities of water to build these homes. Of course, if you look at, when I was born, there was only 2.8 billion on the planet. I'm 63 years old. We're now 7.8. all the problems of living in harmony with nature, it's an incredible problem. So if you comply our needs with non-biodegradable, in a way, materials that don't impact nature, then we're living on the surface in harmony with nature. That was the basic idea of using this plastic. But of course, we concentrated on making the whole cycle completely circular, so we're not mixing plastics. The day you don't want the house anymore, you just crush it and make something else.
So you break the house down and just start it all over again,
We take
make something else.
recycled plastics to make the house, and when the house, you don't need it or don't want it, or you want to move it, you dismantle it, you crush it, and you can make another house or make something else.
I thought it was more like Lego blocks. You took them away and rebuilt them, but you crush it and
No, I mean the material we're using, we're not mixing plastics, because there is a few experiences where you see people mixing plastic. But we should think today, what's going to happen when you have to recycle this thing? So we're here in the Grand Palais that was built in it was the same period as of the Eiffel Tower. We thought that humanity would resolve all the problems with science, and we developed a kind of binary way of thinking, saying, oh, this is great, let's do it. I think what we're trying to develop and to develop the awareness today is that today we have to think in a trinary way. That's a good idea. Should we do it? What is the consequences? If the consequences are good, then we can do it. We have to think differently, and this is what we're developing, all of us, and we're a community of people that are sort of promoting this idea. And I'm very optimistic, because the quantity of science and technology and goodwill is incredible. Only I think we shouldn't organize rich people recycling their own goods and closing the market, because the price of waste will go up, and then you can't do anything with it, because they'll be out of the market. And this is where I think our friend the economist is very important, is to explain to the authorities that they should look into the opportunity of this enormous economy.
So which brings me really nicely onto my next question. Do we have stats or momentum from a regulation perspective that's supporting new materials?
Absolutely. I mean, the European Union, the European Commission has been pretty active on that domain. I think the spearheaded movement of circular economy by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has even led to the European Commission's naming of the directive being the Circular Economy Directive. So there's quite a bit happening over there. But of course, when it comes to regulation, you're putting constraints on markets. So in terms of regulation design, we need to be wary of the operational dynamics, or how implementation works on the ground when setting up those rules or regulations, right? So going back to Igor's point as to what an economist would say in terms of the incentives out there, whether regulation needs to be in place or not, we've seen a great example of how you may not necessarily need regulation to move things, and Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done an amazing job there, simply by putting out figures that talks about the value that is actually left on the table, and firms can themselves recover by moving into new systems, new designs, and so on. So from that point of view, regulation is absolutely needed in certain contexts where this money on the table is not easy to find out, but also we need to be wary of how setting ground rules without really understanding the dynamics of those grounds can be dangerous, right? So we need to be better informed about those opportunities before we go into the regulation direction, in my opinion.
Can I just add, I think one of the important things is not to look at it, the circular economy or these issues from one dimension. So it's not just a materials innovation agenda, it's a systems innovation agenda, because plastics in and of themselves are not bad. Plastics have a remarkable properties, which is why they become so popular. The problem is that we don't have a system that works, that's economic, that keeps the materials in use, that keeps them flowing in the system. So we definitely need materials innovation, for sure. We need to replace a number of the materials that are problematic, and we need to innovate rapidly in that space. But we also need to think about innovation for materials that exist today so we can actually keep them in flow. And that's a really big deal. And regulation has a big part to play in that, but also industrial collaboration. And we work with many of the world's largest companies, and we really believe that there's a need for company innovation, but also pre-competitive collaboration to get standards in place, standards for reuse, standards for materials, standards for labeling, that benefit everybody, that actually get things to work, because it's a free-for-all at the moment, and we need some standards above which we innovate. So we need the Internet Protocol for plastics, and then we can actually get things working.
I love that, the Internet Protocol for plastics. Igor, being the inventor, what collaborations really supported you in bringing the plastic house, that's what I'm going to call it now, to fruition?
Well, you have to, what's interesting is everybody knows a plastic bottle as a soft, transparent material. Mm-hmm. But the PET has a double personality. If you cool it slowly, it crystallizes, becomes very hard. And even the industry hasn't explored the possibilities of using PET as a hard material because it's always been used to make bottles. And compared to other plastics that exist today that are much more toxic than PET, I think there's a whole span of seeing how we could replace those toxic plastics by hardened PET. So in what we know about materials today, we should even think of maybe there's a more clever way to use them in a circular way. And my idea was really, because I have a foundation for children, my inspiration was how can we give access to the most people. And the problem is to control the price of wastes, because if they become very expensive, then the circularity and the opportunity that we have today will be spoiled. You have big international multinationals who are now committed to recapture their own wastes and are investing for that. This is very nice, but I think it will raise the price of PET for the others, and they will have access to inexpensive material because they're controlling their own wastes. So I think one should think it in a more overall way, because this incredible opportunity could be lost because badly managed.
So it does require a lot of thinking kind of outside of the box. We've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to ask both of you, all three of you, a really quick question. What is, I say really quick, it's a big question. I'm going to see if you can condense into a small answer. What is your big vision for a circular economy?
I think what we're seeing is that there's a very rapid take-up of the idea. In the last 10 years, it's exploded. And our vision now is to get that to go to scale globally and to get massive innovation and technical orientation and industrial globalization of this. It needs to be driven through the industrial system to get it to go big fast. So my vision is that it scales rapidly. It's driven by innovation companies, policy aligns to get it to happen and enable it to happen, and people get behind it as a big idea, because it really is a solution for many of the global challenges.
Huge. Igor, what about you? What's your big vision for a circular economy?
Well, very shortly is to organize a collection of all our wastes, because that's not yet fine. We also have a solution, which is not a housing solution, but we've conceptualized a way to make it, optimize it, and then think about the basic infrastructures we can do with these materials to develop the world and open new markets and new clients even for the big corporations.
So using getting better at collecting it and using that what's collected for core infrastructure.
First thing we should do is clean up the world. I mean, and then do worthy things with it in an intelligent circular economy, which will be probably designed by my two partners here.
Atalay, what about you? What's your big vision for a circular
My big vision for the circular economy is for the corporations to internalize these ideas as a necessity for business. Sooner or later, they'll realize that my 8-year-old daughters or my 94-year-old grandmother knows about the plastics issue, you know, the island in the ocean, and all of these things. And there is no way of getting out of this with, you know, simple, basic ideas. They need to be transformational and need to realize that the growth-based economy is no longer relevant or sufficient for economic prosperity, and they will have to do this sustainability vision investment at the soonest time possible. Now, we understand that internal dynamics or incentive structures inside those corporations may not necessarily align, but creating those alignments from the top all the way down to the bottom is the most important component that we need to invest more on. And again, as a business school faculty, that is the vision that I would like to invest in.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for your time. Andrew, Igor, and Atalay, please give them a warm round of applause.